The air in the valley of Rio Hurtado does not merely exist. It imposes itself upon the senses, like a memory of something that happened a long time ago. A scent composed of ancient, sun-parched stone that is baked under the merciless glare of the southern sun for eons, and a faint, metallic tang of minerals long forgotten by the rain. Copper, lithium, iron, the blood of the earth exposed to the thinning atmosphere. It is a thin, dry presence that tastes of red earth and the sharp, cold scent of ozone that drifts down from the high peaks of the Andes as the sun surrenders to the horizon. The transition from day to night here is not a gentle fading of light. It is a bruised purple struggle, a collapse of temperatures that sends a shiver through the bedrock. Here, the world feels as though it is stripped to its very bones. The vegetation is sparse, clutching at the dusty soil with desperate roots, leaving the geology naked and exposed. A place where the barrier between the terrestrial and the celestial is worn to a translucent thread. You can feel the vacuum of space pressing down, a heavy hand resting on the shoulder of the atmosphere. The silence of the night is not an absence of sound. It is a heavy, ringing thing, a pressure that rests against the eardrums like the weight of deep water, or the static of a radio tuned to a dead channel. It is broken only by the low, constant, mechanical thrum of the cooling sensors housed within the white domes that dot the ridge, like the breathing of sleeping giants. These machines are the sentinels of humanity, the eyes of the asteroid terrestrial impact last alert system, or ATLAS for short, their mirrors polished to a perfection that mocks the jagged, uneven nature of the hills, polished to within a fraction of a wavelength of light, sensitive enough to detect the heat of a candle on the moon. They hum with a deep, internal vibration, a subatomic shiver that speaks of temperatures nearing the absolute zero of the void, liquid nitrogen coursing through veins of copper and steel, cryostats working in rhythmic cycles to suppress the thermal noise of the atoms themselves. Just to catch a ghost, one must be as still as death. Inside the CCD cameras, the silicon pixels are waiting, hungry for photons, keeping the dark current at bay, creating a trap for light that has traveled for millions of years to die on a microchip. Inside the control rooms, the air is filtered and still, recycled through heavy HEPA filters that strip away the dust of the desert, smelling of warm electronics, the ozone of high-voltage capacitors, and the quiet, nervous energy of men and women who have spent their lives staring into the abyss. The coffee in the styrofoam cups has gone cold, a layer of oil shimmering on its surface, like a nebula in a dark cup. Eyes rimmed with red fatigue scan the monitors, watching the waterfalls of data cascading down the screens in green and amber streams. Mostly noise, mostly the random fluctuation of the universe, but sometimes a pattern. On the night of July 1st, 2025, the universe decided to speak, or rather, to whisper. The sensors of the ATLAS unit in Chile, coordinated with its twin in Hawaii, recorded a speck of light that should not have been there. It was not a bright slash across the sky. It was a phantom, a pixel that flickered against the static backdrop of the constellations, a variation in the brightness of the void that was almost imperceptible to the human eye, but screamed at the silicon brain of the algorithm. The automated detection systems pulsed with a sudden, rhythmic urgency, code executing in nanoseconds, comparing star charts from epochs past with the reality of the present. identifying transients, filtering out cosmic rays, filtering out satellites, filtering out the ghosts in the machine, until only one thing remained. A visitor that had crossed the threshold of our solar system without fanfare or warning, slipping through the heliopause, that invisible bubble where the wind of our sun meets the interstellar medium. The software flagged the object as C/2025. N1, a temporary designation for a mystery. The duty astronomer, a man named Matteo who had spent 20 years hunting rocks, leaned forward, his chair creaking in the silence. He tapped a keyboard, bringing up the orbital parameters, and the blood drained from his face. Usually, the sky is predictable, a clockwork mechanism of ellipses and planes that has been mapped since the days of Kepler and Newton. Things move in circles, or stretched circles called ellipses. They are bound to the sun like dogs on a leash, returning again and again. But this light, this faint magnitude, 1755 smudge, thus moving in a hyperbola, a curve that opens into the infinite. The eccentricity value on the screen read 1.0, then 1.5, then refined to 6.1, a number that made the dynamicists sweat in their chairs. In the geometry of the heavens, a circle has an eccentricity of 0, a perfect loop. The ellipses of our planets are nearly perfect. Close to 0, parabolas are 1, meaning they have just enough energy to escape. But 6.1 is a hyperbolic scream, a curve so open, so flat, that it looks like a straight line to the naked eye. It is the mark of a nomad, a soul that was born under a different star and will die in the space between the galaxies, never to return, never to be seen again. Matteo checked the velocity, 58 kilometers per second. Let that number sink in. 58 kilometers in the time it takes to blink. The Earth moves at 30 kilometers per second. This object was tearing through the fabric of our system with nearly double that speed, coming from the high galactic latitudes, plunging down into the ecliptic plane like a diver piercing the surface of a pond. To move at 58 kilometers per second is to be a ghost in the machine, a presence that is here only for a heartbeat before vanishing back into the endless, reaching night. Imagine the kinetic energy of a mountain-sized object moving at such a pace. Millions of tons of rock and ice, possessing the energy of a nuclear arsenal, moving silently through the dark. It ignores the borders of our gravity. It laughs at the tug of the sun. The sun tries to bend its path, to capture it, to make it a part of the family. But the speed is too great. The sun is merely a bump in the road, a gravitational pothole that the traveler barely acknowledges. It is a traveler on a highway that has no exits in our system. The realization hit the control room like a physical blow, colder than the nitrogen in the pipes. This was not a rock from the Oort cloud. This was not a loose piece of debris from the formation of Jupiter. This was the third known interstellar object in the history of human observation. The first was Oumuamua, the Scout, the cigar shape that tumbled and accelerated strangely. The second was Borisov, the Rogue, which looked like a normal comet but moved like an alien. And now came Atlas, the Titan, brighter, faster, and coming closer than either of its predecessors. The data began to propagate from the server in the valley to the cloud, alerting observatories in the Canary Islands, in South Africa, in Australia, whacking up the great eyes of the world. the extremely large telescope, the Subaru telescope, the giant Magellan telescope, all slewing their massive tons of glass and steel to point at a patch of emptiness in the constellation of Sagittarius, Zaking confirmation, Zaking the truth. Back in Rio Hurtado, Mateo walked out of the control dome and stood on the balcony. The wind bit at his face, thin and sharp. He looked up, past the Southern Cross, past the Magellanic Clouds, into the dark rift of the Milky Way. Somewhere up there, invisible to his naked eye, a rock was falling towards him. A rock that had been falling for 14 billion years. The thought was vertigo-inducing. It made him feel small, smaller than the dust on his boots, smaller than an atom. He lit a cigarette, the flame flickering in the wind, a tiny chemical reaction against the backdrop of nuclear fusion stars. And he wondered, what does it look like? What does it smell like? This piece of the deep past. Does it carry the scars of dead stars? Does it carry the frozen atmosphere of a world that died before the earth was born? The silence of the valley gave no answer, only the wind and the steady, rhythmic thrum of the cooling pumps, keeping the sensors cold, keeping the watch, waiting for the next photon, waiting for the morning, which would bring not just the sun, but a new era in our understanding of the cosmos. The intruder had arrived, and the door to the solar system had been kicked open. As the data streams propagate from the mountaintops to the servers beneath the sea, the astronomers begin to realize that they are not just looking at an object. They are looking at a clock that stopped ticking long before the Earth was formed. To understand 3i at last is to peel back the skin of the universe and look at the bone beneath. The trajectory analysis conducted by the University of Canterbury and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory reveals a truth that is even more staggering than its speed. By tracing the hyperbola backwards, unwinding the path of the object through the spiral arms of the Milky Way, accounting for the rotation of the galaxy and the gravitational potholes of dark matter, the origin point points not to the thin disk where our sun resides, that comfortable, metal-rich suburb of the galaxy where stars are born in nurseries of gas and dust, but to the thick disk, the galactic attic, a region populated by the ancient guard, the seniors of the Milky Way. The stars there are old, eccentric, moving in high, plunging orbits that take them far above and below the galactic plane, survivors of a time when the universe was younger, wilder, and far less organized. Spectroscopy reveals the age of the object to be likely between 8 and 14 billion years. Let that number settle in the mind like a heavy stone. 14 billion years. This rock was already frozen solid when our sun was just a scattered cloud of hydrogen waiting to collapse. It was drifting through the void when the earth was a molten hellscape. It was silent when the dinosaurs roared, and it was still silent when humanity learned to light its first fire. 3i at last is a relic, a time capsule from the cosmic dawn, from an era known as the Epoch of Reionization, when the first lights turned on in the infinite dark. Its composition reflects this ancient pedigree, as the James Webb Space Telescope turns its golden, hexagonal eye toward the visitor, sleeving in its massive sunshield to block the glare of our local star. The light reflected from the comet is broken down into a rainbow of data, a spectrum that tells the story of its birth, usually Comets are dirty snowballs, rich in water ice, smelling of ammonia and earth, built from the debris of stars like ours, stars rich in oxygen and heavy metals. But Atlas is different. The spectrum is alien. Sharp absorption lines where there should be smooth curves, gaps where there should be water. The Webb telescope sees a surface dominated not by water ice, but by frozen carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide, a dry, frigid chemistry that speaks of a birthplace far colder and more isolated than our own Kuiper belt, a snow line pushed out to the very edge of a dying system. This object was likely formed around a population 2 star, a metal-poor sun that burned hot and blue and died young, exploding in a supernova that scattered its children into the dark. Or perhaps it was ejected, kicked out of its cradle by a wandering gas giant, a gravitational slingshot that accelerated it to escape velocity, banishing it from its home to wander the interstellar medium forever. Imagine the moment of ejection, the violent acceleration, the parent star shrinking to a point of light, then fading into the background, and then the silence. For billions of years, the comet moved in absolute zero, 3 degrees Kelvin, the temperature of the cosmic background radiation, a cold so profound that it stops all chemistry, halts all entropy, preserving the object in a cryogenic sleep, a perfect museum piece, drifting through the spiral arms, dodging nebulae, passing through the wakes of other stars, but never stopping, never warming, until now. The entry into our solar system was a shock, a thermal violence. As Atlas crossed the orbit of Neptune, the faint warmth of our sun began to touch it, like a whisper to a sleeper. The surface, frozen for eons, began to react. The carbon monoxide, which sublimates at incredibly low temperatures, was the first to wake, turning from solid ice directly into gas, and exploding from microscopic fissures in the crust, creating a tenuous atmosphere, a coma, not of water vapor, but of dry, invisible gas, invisible to the eye but bright to the sensors. The object began to breathe, shedding the mass it had carried for 14 billion years, bleeding its history into the vacuum of our system. This outgassing acted like a thruster, a gentle, rocket-like push that slightly altered its trajectory, a non-gravitational acceleration that confirmed its cometary nature. But it was the color that truly unsettled the observers. As the object moved closer, crossing the orbit of Mars, the coma thickened, interacting with the solar UV radiation. The gas began to glow, not the familiar cyan blue of terrestrial comets, which comes from cyanogen and diatomic carbon, but a faint, ghostly, sickly green, a distinct hue that hinted at something deeper, something buried in the ice, something metallic. Back in Rio Hurtado, the screens showed the spectral breakdown of this glow, and the chemical fingerprint was baffling. The ratio of carbon isotopes was wrong, heavily favoring carbon-13, a signature of the early universe. Before the stellar furnaces had time to churn out the heavier carbon-12 that makes up our bodies, this realization created a wall between us and the object. It is made of the same protons and electrons, but its recipe is fundamentally different. It is a visitor from a foreign country where the laws of cooking matter are slightly askew. To look at 3, I at last, is to look at a ghost, a physical manifestation of a memory that the galaxy has all but forgotten. We are the children of the thin disk, soft, wet, made of recycled stardust. Atlas is the child of the thick disk, hard, dry, made of primordial ash. The encounter is a clash of generations, a clash of eras. And as the comet rushes towards its perihelion, towards the fire of the sun, the heat is rising, the ice is cracking, and the true secret of its core, the metal heart that has been hidden under the carbon frost, is about to be revealed. A secret that smells of heavy industry and toxic dust, waiting to be sniffed by the spectrometers of Earth. The messenger has arrived, and it is beginning to speak, not in words, but in the language of atoms. And the first word is Bento. They say that funny to be on day. Disturbance, anomaly. The closer it gets to the fire, the stranger the smoke becomes. Usually, the smell of a comet is the smell of a dirty stable. Ammonia, rotten eggs, the damp funk of melting ancient snow. But 3, I at last does not smell like a stable. It smells like a factory. As the object crosses the frost line, the invisible boundary in the solar system, where water ice turns to gas, the observatories expect the familiar surge of hydroxyl molecules, the signature of water breaking down. But the instruments on the Very Large Telescope in Chile, equipped with the Muse spectrograph, see nothing of the sort. Instead, they detect a signal so sharp and so unexpected that the calibration engineers assume it is a glitch, a ghost in the fiber optics. They see the glowing spectral fingerprint of atomic nickel, solitary, unaccompanied, screaming into the vacuum. In the cosmic recipe book of our local neighborhood, nickel and iron are twins, born from the same supernovae, forged in the same dying hearts of massive stars. Finding one without the other is like finding a shadow without an object. Yet here, in the coma of Atlas, the nickel stands alone. There is no iron to be found above the detection limits. The ratio is impossible, broken, alien. This anomaly sends ripples of quiet panic through the scientific community. Papers are drafted in haste in the cafeterias of Garching and Pasadena. Whispers of artificial hulls, of refined metal plating sublimating under the solar glare, capture the imagination of the internet. But the chemists, the ones who understand the dark bonding of atoms, propose a solution that is stranger than any spaceship. They speak of nickel carbonyl, a molecule that forms in the deepest, coldest silence, where carbon monoxide, ice traps, nickel atoms on the surface of dust grains, waiting for a little heat. Nickel carbonyl is a volatile, colorless liquid that turns into gas at temperatures far lower than solid metal. It allows the nickel to escape while the iron remains locked in the rocky core, imprisoned by its own high melting point. This is natural alchemy, a distillation process that has been waiting 14 billion years to happen. If you could stand on the surface of the comet, protected by a suit, and crack the visor for a split second, the air would taste musty, sooty, a peculiar odor, like brick dust and old coins. A warning. For nickel carbonyl is one of the deadliest substances known to man. Oh no, a breath of it would silence a human heart in seconds, turning the blood to sludge. Imagine this mountain of ice, venting plumes of invisible, heavy poison into the pristine vacuum. A dark, rugged landscape shrouded in a toxic fog that no biology could withstand. As the sunlight strikes these molecules, it shatters them, stripping away the carbon monoxide shell and leaving the naked nickel atoms to dance in the solar wind. These atoms absorb the ultraviolet light of the sun and re-emit it as a fluorescence, creating the glow. The green light of Atlas is not the cyan of cyanogen that we are used to. It is a harder, colder green, a neon emerald that looks artificial against the backdrop of the stars, a sign that reads, "Keep away." Meanwhile, the James Webb Space Telescope, hovering at its own Lagrange point, pierces the veil of the coma to look at the dust itself. Its mid-infrared instrument, MIRI, tests the heat radiating from the grains and finds another puzzle. The dust is not the fluffy, fractile aggregates of our solar system. It is compact, dense shards of silicate and carbon that have been compacted by ons of radiation pressure and cosmic rays. They are not pebbles, they are shrapnel, remnants of a violent event that shattered a world. The telescope detects signatures of olivine and pyroxene, but they are magnesium-rich, lacking the iron that colors our own rocks red and brown. This confirms the orphan nature of the object. It came from a system starved of heavy metals, a system that struggled to form planets, a system where rocks were rare and precious things. To look at the data from Webb is to look at the skeleton of a famine victim, stripped, dry, and ancient. The combination of the toxic gas and the dry dust paints a picture of a celestial body that is hostile to the very concept of life as we know it. It is a sterile messenger, a sterilizing presence, and yet there is a beauty in its lethality. The way the nickel atoms interact with the solar wind creates a bow shock, a shimmering shield of plasma that deflects the particles of our sun, protecting the icy heart within. The comet is fighting the sun, resisting the heat, using its own poison as a shield. This is the chemistry of survival, the chemistry of the deep research, where only the hardiest molecules endure. The astronomers watch the green light intensify as Atlas races towards the orbit of Earth, knowing that they are witnessing a chemical reaction that has never been seen in our solar system before, a laboratory experiment conducted on a galactic scale, with the sun as the burner and the comet as the flask. And we are the students, taking notes in the dark, terrified and mesmerized by the toxic beauty of the ancient wanderer, while the chemists debated the toxicity of the green gas, and the geologists argued over the density of the dust. Another group of watchers turned their ears to the sky, hoping for something more than just elements, hoping for a pattern, a sequence, a hello. The obsession with the technosignature is a deeply human trait. We are terrified of the dark, and so we pray that someone else is out there holding a flashlight. On December 18th, 2025, the atmosphere at the Green Bank Observatory in West Virginia was thick with a quiet, electric tension. This place is the National Radio Quiet Zone, a sanctuary of silence where Wi-Fi is banned, where microwaves are illegal, where even the spark plugs of gasoline cars are frowned upon, all to protect the sensitivity of the Robert C. Byrd Green Bank Telescope, a dish of metal so vast that a football stadium could fit inside it, watching the sky with an unblinking aluminum eye. The target was 3i at last. Now, approaching its closest point to Earth. The distance was closing. The geometry was perfect. If there was a transmitter on that rock, even one as weak as a cell phone, the Big Ear would hear it. The project was led by the Breakthrough Listen Initiative, the most comprehensive search for extraterrestrial intelligence ever undertaken. They were not looking for nickel or carbon. They were looking for narrowband signals, sharp spikes of radio energy that nature cannot produce. Nature is messy. It broadcasts in broadband. Static, hiss, roar. But technology is precise. It cuts the spectrum into thin slices. The telescope scanned across 4 distinct radio bands, billions of channels simultaneously, listening to the green ghost as it tumbled through the night. The initial readout was a shock to the system. The screens in the control room lit up like a Christmas tree. Data waterfalls cascading in bright, vertical lines. The computers flagged 471,000 signals of interest. Let that number sink in. Nearly 500,000 spikes that looked, at first glance, like technology. For a heartbeat, the researchers felt the vertigo of contact, the adrenaline of the eureka moment. Was it a beacon, a telemetry stream, a library of alien encyclopedia being beamed at us, at the speed of light? But science is the art of disappointment, the art of filtering out the noise to find the truth. The algorithms went to work, mercilessly dissecting each signal, analyzing its Doppler drift, its frequency modulation, its origin. One by one, the aliens were unmasked as the ghosts of our own civilization. This one was a Starlink satellite passing overhead. That one was a radar from an airport 300 miles away. This one was a faulty transformer on a power line. That one was the reflection of a GPS signal bouncing off the comet's own coma. We are a noisy species. We have filled the radio spectrum with our chatter, polluting the silence of the cosmos with our own voice. And when the filters were finished, when the last terrestrial interference was stripped away, the screen was blank. The 471,000 possibilities had collapsed into zero. Nothing remained but the cold, featureless static of the universe, the cosmic microwave background, hissing its 14-billion-year-old song. No transmitter stronger than 0.1 watts was active on 3 Atlas. If there were beings on that rock, they were dead, or sleeping, or they had no interest in talking to the likes of us. The comet was radio silent, a mute mountain falling through the sky. The disappointment in the control room was palpable, a collective sigh that seemed to deflate the very air. We wanted it to be a ship. We wanted it to be Rama. We wanted it to be a visitation. But the universe is not a science fiction novel. It does not care about our narrative desires. 3 Atlas is a rock, a magnificent, exotic, ancient rock, but a rock nonetheless. It carries no message for us, no warnings, no greetings. Its silence is its message, a reminder that we are still alone in our small corner of the galaxy, screaming into the void and hearing only our own echoes. Yet, in that silence, there is a profound dignity. The object does not need to speak to be significant. It exists. It endures. It travels. That is enough. As the radio astronomers turned off their recorders and rubbed their tired eyes, accepting the verdict of the void, the comet continued its plunge. Indifferent to our listening ears, it was heading for the most violent part of its journey. The perihelion, the point of closest approach to the sun, where the heat would strip away its silence in a different way, not with radio waves, but with a physical transformation so violent it would be visible to the entire solar system. The mute traveler was about to scream, not with a voice, but with light, preparing to unfurl a banner of dust and ions that would challenge the sun itself. The radio silence was over. The visual symphony was about to begin. The silence of the radio spectrum was replaced by the roar of the solar wind, a torrent of charged particles streaming from the sun at 400 kilometers per second, slamming into the intruder with the force of a hurricane made of protons. I at last plunged toward its perihelion, the point of closest approach. The interaction between the star and the stone ceased to be a polite observation and became a violent brawl. The sun is a jealous god. It does not tolerate cold things in its court. It poured radiation onto the surface of the comet, stripping electrons from atoms, breaking molecules apart, turning the invisible coma into a glowing plasma shield. From the vantage point of Earth's orbit, the X-ray satellites CHEM-M Newton and XRISM turned their sensitive detectors toward the comet and saw a ghost transform into a star. Usually, comets are dark in X-rays. They are cold, dusty things, but Atlas lit up the high-energy detectors like a welding torch. This phenomenon is known as solar wind charge exchange, a process where the heavy, highly charged ions of oxygen and carbon in the solar wind crash into the neutral gas of the comet, stealing electrons in a violent celestial theft, releasing a burst of X-ray photons in the process. It created a halo, a crown of invisible fire extending 400,000 kilometers into space, larger than the distance between the Earth and the Moon, wrapping the nucleus in a shroud of energy that screamed of the conflict between the 14-billion-year-old ice and the living fire of our sun. It was the first time humanity had seen an interstellar object wear a crown, a regalia of ionized gas that marked it as a king of the deep void. But the visible light show was even more perplexing. As the Hubble Space Telescope peered through the glare, it captured an image that defied the intuition of every child who has ever drawn a comet. Normal comets have tails that point away from the sun, pushed by the pressure of light, obeying the solar wind. But Atlas displayed a prominent, defiant spike of material that pointed directly toward our star, a needle of dust aiming at the heart of the sun. This is the anti-tail, a rare and majestic optical illusion born of geometry and the sheer size of the dust grain. The comet was shedding heavy particles. Not fine smoke, but coarse sand, grains of silicate and ancient carbon that were too heavy to be easily pushed around by sunlight. These grains lagged behind the comet in its orbit, forming a disk of debris, and as the Earth passed through the plane of this disk, we looked through it, edge on, seeing the trail of heavy dust projected forward, creating the illusion of a sunward jet. It looked like a silver blade cutting through the darkness of the inner solar system, a weapon drawn in anger. Detailed time-lapse photography revealed that this blade was not static. It was alive. It wobbled, shifting its position rhythmically every 7 hours and 45 minutes, like a pendulum swinging in the dark. This processional dance gave the astronomers the final key to the physical nature of the nucleus. The heart of Atlas was rotating, tumbling end over end with a period of 15 hours and 30 minutes, like a capsized ship in a heavy sea. As it spun, active vents on its surface rotated into and out of the sunlight, turning on and off like garden sprinklers, creating spiral jets of dust that fed the anti-tail, breathing, pulsing, bleeding its mass into the vacuum to create a temporary glory. The heat at perihelion was intense enough to melt lead, to warp steel. The surface of the comet, accustomed to the absolute zero of the thick disk, should have shattered, should have disintegrated under the thermal shock. We expected it to break apart, to crumble into a cloud of gravel like so many comets before it. The Soho Solar Observatory watched unblinking, waiting for the death of the visitor. But Atlas is made of sterner stuff. It was forged in the fires of the early universe, compacted by eons of gravity, and it did not break. It did not bow. It absorbed the heat. It vented its poison. It wore its crown of X-rays, and it swung around the sun with the grace of a slingshot, surviving the furnace, emerging from the glare battered but whole. A phoenix of ice rising from the ashes of the solar corona, its velocity increasing, its path bending, heading back out towards the dark, leaving behind a trail of heavy dust that would linger in our system for millennia. A footprint of sand on the beach of the solar system, proving that it was here, proving that it survived the fire, and proving that the ancient things are harder to kill than we thought. The dance was over. The music of the spheres faded, and the traveler turned its back on the light, seeking the comfort of the cold once more. Having survived the trial by fire, the traveler turned its gaze outward, away from the blinding hostility of the sun, and toward the deep, calm waters of the outer solar system. But before it could return to the silence of the void, it had one final appointment to keep, one last toll to pay at the gate on March 16th, 2026. 3. I at last crossed the orbit of the asteroid belt, ignoring the thousands of rock fragments that clutter the space between Mars and Jupiter, and aimed itself at the king of planets, Jupiter, the gas giant, the failed star, the gravitational anchor that holds our solar system together, waiting like a massive spider in the center of its web. The encounter was not a collision. Space is too empty for that. It was a gravitational handshake, a maneuver known to physicists as a gravity assist, or a slingshot. As Atlas fell into the immense gravity well of the giant, it was moving fast. But Jupiter is moving too, orbiting the sun at 13 kilometers per second, carrying the angular momentum of a wrecking ball as the tiny comet swept past the planet, passing within 54 million kilometers of the swirling cloud tops. A transfer of energy occurred, invisible, silent, but mathematically absolute. Nature demands balance. Nature demands balance. Atlas stole a fraction of Jupiter's orbital energy, slowing the giant planet down by a measurable amount, perhaps a nanometer per second over 1 billion years. A trivial cost for the king, but for the beggar, it was a fortune. The comet accelerated, stealing the momentum to boost its own velocity even higher, flinging itself out of the gravitational grip of the sun with renewed fury. Imagine the view from the comet, the immense, bandit face of Jupiter filling the sky, the great red spot, a storm larger than the Earth that has raged for centuries, watching the intruder pass like a bloodshot eye. The radiation belts of Jupiter, zinging with trapped electrons, would have crackled against the comet's crust, inducing currents in the nickel-rich ice perhaps causing the green glow to flare one last time in the shadow of the giant. The Galilean moons. Io, Europa, Ganymede, Callisto, hung in the blackness, like pearls on a string, silent witnesses to the flyby. Europa, with its subsurface ocean and potential for life, was just a bright spark to the passing rock. Two worlds, one wet and living, one dry and dead, passing in the night, never to touch, never to know each other. The geometry of the encounter was precise, brutal, efficient. The path of Atlas was bent. The hyperbola widened. The eccentricity increased. The sun's hold was broken forever. There would be no return loop, no elliptical captivity. This was the escape key. The velocity of the object pushed past the escape velocity of the solar system with contemptuous ease. It was no longer falling. It was climbing out of the gravity well that we call home, heading for the interstellar flatlands. As Jupiter receded, shrinking from a world to a disk, to a star, the comet began to cool. The excitement of the inner system was fading. The solar wind grew weaker. The heat dissipated. The surface geysers sputtered and died. The nickel gas condensed back into frost, coating the black dust in a shiny, metallic rime. The coma thinned. The tail disconnected, drifting away to become a ghost train of dust that would confuse astronomers for decades. Atlas was sealing itself up, locking its doors, returning to the state of hibernation that had preserved it for 14 billion years. It had visited the fire. It had danced with the king. And now, having taken what it needed, speed, momentum, direction, it turned its back on us. The show was over. The curtain was falling, and the long, cold commute back to the thick disk had begun, leaving us with nothing but numbers on a screen, and the realization that we are very, very small, standing on a little rock, watching the giants play catch with mountains. The departure of Atlas left a vacuum, not just in the sky, where the constellation of Cancer felt empty without its green ghost, but in the human ambition. We watched it go, helpless to follow, tethered to our rock by the tyranny of the rocket equation. We realized that 58 kilometers per second is a speed that mocks our chemical engines. We cannot chase a bullet after it is fired. We cannot run down a cheetah with a tractor. And that helplessness bred a resolve. Old, engineering fury that settled in the clean rooms of the European Space Agency and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. If we cannot chase, we must ambush. The concept of the interstellar interceptor moved from PowerPoint slides to metal-bending reality. The logic was simple, brutal, and patient, instead of trying to launch a rocket when a target is detected, which takes months of preparation, by which time the visitor is already gone. We must place a hunter in the sky before the prey arrives. We must build a goalkeeper and let him sleep in the grass until the ball is kicked. The project was christened Patience, a name that reflected the virtue we had to learn the hard way. The spacecraft was not a sleek sci-fi fighter. It was a spider made of gold foil and carbon fiber, a machine built for hibernation, designed to endure the cold and the radiation for decades if necessary. Its heart was not a chemical rocket, but a cluster of ion thrusters, efficient, slow-burning, capable of changing its orbit with the delicate precision of a surgeon. In the year 2029, 4 years after Atlas waved goodbye, the heavy Ariane 6 rocket rose from the jungle of French Guiana. piercing the tropical clouds on a pillar of fire, carrying the hope of the next generation. It did not head for Mars, nor the moon. It headed for the Lagrange point, L2, a gravitational parking spot 1.5 million kilometers behind the Earth. A place of dynamic equilibrium, where the gravity of the Sun and the Earth cancel out. A blind spot. A shadow where a ship can hide from the thermal noise of the home planet. Patience arrived at its station, and it went to sleep. The solar panels unfolded, drinking the unfiltered sunlight. The systems checked out. The sensors calibrated. And then the lights went dim. The main computer entered a low power cycle. The reaction wheels spun down. The heater circuits dropped to the bare minimum required to keep the hydrazine from freezing. The machine became a dormant seed, floating in the void, waiting for the call, waiting for the network of telescopes on Earth to scream, "Look there." It is a trap set for a ghost, a spider web woven in the void, waiting for the next fly. Statistics say there is always at least one interstellar object inside the orbit of Mars at any given moment. We just don't see them. They are too dark, too fast, too faint. But the next time, when the alarm sounds, when the algorithms flag a hyperbolic orbit, patience will wake up. It will fire its thrusters, breaking its station keeping, and it will intercept, not to look from afar, not to squint through a telescope, but to fly alongside, to match the speed, to drop a probe onto the alien ice, to touch, to taste, to bring a piece of the thick disk into the realm of human knowledge. The scientists who built Patience know they might be dead before it wakes up. They built it for their children, or their grandchildren. It is a monument to delayed gratification, a silent sentinel drifting in the shadow of the Earth, watching the stars with unblinking sensors, listening to the silence of the deep research, knowing that the galaxy is messy, and sooner or later, it will throw another rock, and this time, we will be ready to catch it. The show is over. The audience has gone home, and the actor leaves the stage, stepping out of the spotlight and into the wings where the shadows are deep and permanent. 3. Atlas moves past the orbit of Saturn. The ringed jewel of the solar system appears only as a bright, yellow-white star in the comet's sky, a silent sentinel watching the departure. The distance from the sun grows, and the inverse square law of light exacts its price. The solar energy striking the comet's surface drops to 1% of what it was at Earth. Then a fraction of a percent. The heat is gone. The violence of the perihelion is a fading memory. The surface of the nucleus, which had screamed with geysers and hissed with escaping gas, begins to quiet down. The sublimation stops. The pressure inside the vents drops. The jets falter and die. The coma, that magnificent cloud of gas and dust that had reflected the sunlight and terrified the superstitious, begins to collapse. Gravity, weak as it is on a 15-kilometer rock, asserts its dominance. The gas molecules slow down, lose their energy, and fall back onto the surface. A gentle, toxic snow begins to fall. Microscopic crystals of carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and the deadly nickel carbonyl, settling over the rugged terrain, coating the black mountains in a fresh layer of frost, sealing the cracks, smoothing the scars. The green glow is extinguished. The fluorescence of the nickel atoms ceases as the ultraviolet flux from the sun becomes too weak to excite them. The neon sign is turned off. Atlas is no longer a green ghost. It is a black stone once again, cloaked in the darkest velvet, darker than coal, reflecting almost no light, becoming invisible against the backdrop of the void. It crosses the orbit of Uranus, the ice giant, rolling on its side, indifferent to the visitor. It crosses the orbit of Neptune, the windiest world, the final gatekeeper. By the year 2029, Atlas is in the Kuiper Belt, the realm of the frozen dwarfs. Pluto, Eris, Makemake, they are its cousins, but it does not stop to say hello. It moves too fast, 58 kilometers per second, 60, 62. The gravity assist from Jupiter has given it a permanent boost. It is tearing through the suburbs of the solar system like a sports car driving through a cemetery. On Earth, the tracking becomes a desperate struggle against the noise. The great telescopes, the 30-meter telescope, the ELT, strain their optics to find the needle in the haystack. The magnitude drops. 25, 28, 30. The object is now a single photon event, a statistical fluctuation on a CCD chip. Astronomers stack hundreds of images, layering them to boost the signal, catching the last faint photons that bounce off the receding back of the traveler. On a Tuesday night in November 2030, the computers at the Minor Planet Center in Cambridge make the final entry. Last observation, negative. The signal has dropped below the noise floor. Atlas has vanished. Not destroyed, just gone. Gone from our sight. Gone from our senses. Swallowed by the vastness of the dark. It has crossed the heliopause, the magnetic bubble that protects us from the galaxy, and entered the interstellar medium, the ocean between the stars, where the wind is hydrogen and the waves are light years long. The silence returns to the rock, absolute, crushing, cold. Temperature stabilizes at just a few degrees above absolute zero. The atoms in the crystal lattice stop vibrating. Time loses its meaning. There are no days, no years, only the endless drift. The star fields shift slowly, almost imperceptibly, as Atlas begins the next leg of its journey. A journey that will take it to the other side of the Milky Way. Perhaps in 1 billion years, it will pass another star. Perhaps another species will see a flash of movement in their telescopes. But for us, the story is done. The book is closed, and we are left alone in the pool of light around our sun, wondering where the ghost has gone, and what secrets it took with it back into the deep research of the night. Memory is a fickle thing, liable to fade like a photograph left in the Atacama sun. But data is eternal, preserved in the diamond glass storage banks of the global archive. 50 years have passed since the green ghost vanished into the dark. The year is 2075, and the valley of Rio Hurtado has changed. The white domes are gone, replaced by flat, adaptive arrays that lie on the ground like pools of liquid mercury, shifting their shape in microsecons to cancel out the turbulence of the atmosphere. But the wind is the same, the smell of the ozone is the same, and the silence is still heavy, ringing with the weight of the weight. The astronomers who saw Atlas with their own eyes are mostly gone now, returned to the dust themselves. But their grandchildren stand at the consoles, inheriting the watch, inheriting the obsession. 3. Atlas is no longer a news headline. It is a textbook case. The Atlas event is taught in astrophysics classes as the moment humanity lost its innocence. Before Atlas, we thought of the solar system as an island, isolated, safe. After Atlas, we realized it is a bus stop, a transit hub in a busy galactic metropolis. The legacy of the comet is not in the rock itself, which is now billions of kilometers away, lost in the Oort cloud noise, but in the hard drives. Artificial intelligence, vastly more powerful than the primitive algorithms of 2025, has spent decades chewing on the petabytes of spectral data recorded during that brief flyby, mining the noise for secrets. And it found them. In 2050, a deep learning core in Zurich discovered a subtle anomaly in the isotopic decay rates of the nickel gas, a modulation that hinted at the presence of strange matter, or a dark matter interaction, suggesting that the thick disk of the galaxy is not just older, but fundamentally different in its physics. We learned that the universe of 14 billion years ago operated on a slightly different rulebook, and Atlas was the Rosetta Stone that taught us how to read it. This realization killed the romance of aliens, but it birthed the romance of archaeology. We stopped looking for spaceships and started looking for ruins. We realized the galaxy is a graveyard, full of the debris of dead worlds, and we are the grave robbers, trying to piece together the history of the Milky Way from the scraps that fall into our yard. The cultural impact was just as profound. The interstellar perspective took hold. Nations that once fought over borders on a single planet began to collaborate on the shield, the planetary defense grid, because Atlas taught us that 58 kilometers per second leaves no time for politics. If Atlas had been on a collision course, there would have been no treaties, just impact. So we built the eyes, bigger, sharper. Looking further out, the patient spacecraft, launched in the fervor of the 20s, is still out there at Lagrange point L2. It has been sleeping for 45 years. A derelict spider covered in space dust, its battery decaying, its hull pitted by micrometeoroids. But its heart is still beating, a faint, rhythmic ping sent back to Earth once a week. I am here. I am waiting. It has become a symbol of human stubbornness, a mental vow that we will not miss the next one. And the next one is inevitable. Statistics are a cruel master, but they do not lie. On a quiet night in August 2075, the cycle completes itself. The Mercury mirrors in Rio Hurtado detect an anomaly, not in Sagittarius this time, but in the constellation of Draco, the Dragon, a faint, magnitude 19.5 speck, darker than Atlas, moving faster, 63 kilometers per second. The orbit is hyperbolic. The eccentricity is 7.2. The alarms do not scream this time. They chime, a soft, Polita notification on the holographic displays. The duty astronomer, a young woman named Sophia, freezes. She knows the history. She knows the legend. She looks at the numbers, and she smiles. She types the command sequence that wakes up the sleeping spider out at L2 Seft, and the patient's probe receives the signal. Power surges through its frozen circuits. The heaters engage. The ion thrusters prime. The spider wakes up, shaking off the dust of half a century. It has a target, say, /2075. I won, the fourth visitor. Humanity is no longer the surprised child. We are the hunter. We have learned. We have prepared. And as the new ghost rushes towards the sun, we are ready to meet it, not with fear, but with a net. The legacy of Atlas is this moment, the transition from observer to participant. The valley winds blow, and the big eyes blink, and the chase begins anew. Time becomes a meaningless variable, a coordinate that stretches until it snaps. The clock of the universe ticks not in seconds, or years, or millennia, but in galactic rotations. 250 million years for the sun to circle the center of the Milky Way once. A cosmic year. 3I Atlas has traveled for 20 of these years since it left the cradle of the thick disk, and it has traveled for another 10 since it brushed past the small blue world that named it. The calendar of Earth has long since crumbled. The civilization that built the Patience probe, that listened with the big ears, that dreamed of the stars, is gone, or changed beyond recognition. Evolve it into something pure energy, or return to the mud. It does not matter to the rock. The rock endures. The rock remembers, not with a brain, but with its trajectory. The path of Atlas through the void is a physical memory of every gravitational handshake it has ever received, the nudge from its parent star, the kick from the giant planet that exiled it, and the slight, almost imperceptible bend in its arc caused by a yellow dwarf star called Sol, and its king planet Jupiter. That encounter is etched into the orbital elements forever, a scar of gravity that dictates its destiny. The galaxy itself has changed. The spiral arms have wound tighter. The great collision with the Andromeda galaxy has begun. The night sky is no longer a band of milk, but a chaotic, beautiful wreck of merging star streams. Huge bursts of star formation light up the dark like fireworks, and through this turmoil, the traveler moves, silent, cold, dark. It has crossed the emptiness between the arms. It has survived the radiation storms of the galactic core. And now, eons later, it approaches a new shore, a dense molecular cloud in the constellation that humans once called Cygnus. The Swan. The vacuum is no longer empty here. It is thick with hydrogen gas, dust, and potential. The friction begins. Not fire, but a gentle drag. The speed of the comet, conserved for billions of years, begins to bleed away. It plunges into the nebula, a dark bullet entering a cloud of smoke. The temperature rises slightly, just a few degrees, but enough to wake the chemistry one last time. The surface of Atlas, covered in the frost of the interstellar medium, begins to sublime. The ancient nickel, the carbon, the complex organic molecules trapped in the black glass are released. They mix with the gas of the nebula, seeding it, enriching it. Gravity takes hold. The cloud is collapsing. A new star is forming. A bright, hot protostar spinning in the center of a disk of dust. Atlas is caught in the turbulence. It is torn apart, not by malice, but by creation. The nucleus fractures, the ice melts, the heavy metals, forged in the dawn of time, rain down into the accretion disk. The atoms of three, I at last. Atoms that saw the universe when it was dark. Atoms that flew past the earth when it was teeming with life. Atoms that carry the legacy of the thick disk are now part of the recipe for a new world. Perhaps they will form the core of a planet. Perhaps they will become the hemoglobin in the blood of a creature that will not be born for another billion years. The cycle closes. The messenger becomes the message. The traveler becomes the home. And somewhere, in the fabric of space-time, the echo of the Rio Hurtado Valley remains. The vibration of the sensors, the awe of the astronomers, the feeling of the wind on the skin. It is all preserved, encoded in the light that is still traveling away from Earth, expanding forever into the infinite. We were the witnesses. We saw the ghost, and in seeing it, we became part of its story, a brief, bright spark of consciousness that illuminated the rock for a femtosecond of cosmic time. And that is enough. The universe does not mourn the dead. It recycles them. It does not fear the dark. It fills it with light. And the silence, the heavy, ringing silence of the desert, is not an absence. It is a promise that the story never ends. It just changes form, from dust to star, from star to dust, from silence to song, and back again, forever and ever. Amen.